Alright, I have looked this project over with regard to the parking alternatives you were considering to the best of my ability and with the information I have. When I came down, I only measured here and this bit here. I didn't bother measuring some of this other stuff down here because we were largely working with this area here, maybe that area there. And I looked at a few other I looked at the entire parking situation, so that because all these three lots are all related, so I wanted to have an idea of exactly what we were dealing with on the whole thing. But I took this was the plan, and it's these three lots that is owned by this TBI. So I looked at that whole hatched area in terms of parking and arrangements and so forth. This is located in Westchester Township. It's zoned M1 for light manufacturing. So generally, if you were going to change zoning or do something like that, Westchester Township's rules with regard to parking would govern. I presume, since you're not changing any use or changing any of the way the property is used, that they will not have a say in it, that you can just stripe this lot however you like to stripe it. They will, however, if we do this work up here and these retaining walls are going to be in, they will be looking at those plans prior to the permit approval. And if this wall is higher than 4 feet, you'll need a professional engineer or architect to provide a design for that. So if we get into this wall up here, I don't know if that will trigger these Westchester Township parking rules. So that much will at least have to be asked about if we get to that point. If their rules do govern, and offhand I really don't think they will because of a few other things for this district, it's governed by this. And I was curious about this, how much they let you cover on the lot, and it's 85%. And I checked all three of these lots. None of them are close to that. So there's plenty of room to do what you want in terms of adding additional parking surface. And this is why I don't think that their rules will govern, because you are not enlarging the building or increasing it in capacity or any of those things. So I think you can just simply do what you are comfortable with in terms of the parking, striping, and arrangements. So while I'm nearly positive this won't apply, if it does apply, they use a pretty rigid or general approach. A parking slot has to be 9 by 18. Any of the parking slots, you can provide some compact spots at 8 by 14, which is nice and short, but they don't count towards your required parking, but I don't think that applies. And then they provide, these are the aisle space. 90-degree parking is what you have on that whole lot, and they want 24-foot wide access path for that, which would really encumber us, as you'll see going forward. And then these are some of the other parking aisle widths that they want, depending upon how you arrange that striping. So that you understand this going forward as we go through this, what I mean when I say that the Westchester Township's parking regulations are rigid, I mean they're rigid just because it's a general approach. For example, they require 24 feet for the 90-degree parking, and they require 14 feet for 45-degree parking. But when you're designing a parking lot, the first thing you look at is the level of service that it requires, and this relates to what type of business it's serving and who is coming there. And A is people that are going to be unfamiliar with the lot, larger cars, and just not familiar. And level of service D is people that are always using that lot, that know how it works and are not confused by it. So the level of service for this particular project, I would think, is no greater than a C. And so you notice that regardless of the level of service, A, B, C, or D, and regardless of the car types mix, their minimum aisle width from these parking experts is 11 feet for a 45-degree parking, whereas over here it's 14 feet for 45-degree parking. Additionally, in terms of this restrictiveness, Westchester Township, you have to have 9 feet by 18 for a parking slot, which is this SW measurement here. And depending upon the level of service, say that C, you could be all the way down to 8.5 feet for that parking slot width. Now its length largely remains at this 18 plus. And then the aisle width, this publication calls for 22.3 at a minimum, and that's for smaller cars, and 24 for these larger cars or a mix of cars. But they do say that in terms of these 90-degree parking, a minimum of 22 foot is required for aisleways where two-way traffic is present, and any bigger than that would allow for safer pedestrian circulation. And you will see how some of these rules, if they govern, play into this. However, even though I don't think those are going to govern, I have approached this as if they were. So most of these parking slots are 9 foot by 18 foot, most of the ones that I develop and look at. And at the end, I play with those numbers a little bit to see what could possibly be squeezed in if those rules don't govern. So for the review of possibilities, the first thing I did was put together a general site plan of what we're working with based on these overhead photos and some of my dimensions that I took. I numbered these buildings this way so that we would have some sort of frame of reference. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then I kind of tried to figure out where the entrances were from the Google Maps and my photos and films, and labeled those as well so we'd have an idea of where the traffic was coming, if that played a role in this. There's probably a door here too, I would guess. And then put in the existing pavements in white, you see, and the loading docks in blue, and the sidewalks and retaining walls, etc. And then I adjusted things to this photograph and with my own dimensions up at this end here, and ended up with this for a starting point. And then I attempted to diagram these parking slots, the existing parking slots, what you see in orange, and count up the tally for each of the parking arrangements. This one here I am not really sure about at all, because that does not seem like a lot of space to back out and get going. So that one's kind of tentative on how many spots there are there, whether they start down here, and this dumpster's occupying some of them now. So I don't know how much this is used for parking or how much it's relied on. So that, and then I numbered these parking lots like this. So we have 5 different parking lots. The way I've divided things, we have 5. 1 here, parking 1. Parking 2 is just those ones here. Parking 3 is these 3 pieces here. 4 is all this lot down here, and parking 5 is whatever's happening back in here. And then try to tally those up, and we have 123 slots plus whatever we end up counting back here. So first of all, before I got really started on what Jimmy had asked for, which was looking at this area here or this area here and maybe this area here, I wanted to look at some of the additional or some of the existing parking and what was exactly happening there. And I started with lot 5 up here just because I wasn't sure how that was being used. And I put this together. I didn't measure back there, but I have that at roughly 37'3" of pavement. And if we put even their compact cars 14 foot deep, that does give you 23 foot back out space. So maybe you can count at least these ones up here. But that is tight back there, and I thought, well, maybe you could expand over the property line like this, but they require you to be 4 feet off of that property line and the rest of that in landscape. So you can't run your parking lot all the way up to that lot line, because if you could, then you end up with, nominally an 18 foot deep slot and 22 foot 4 in front of it to back out here, which starts to approach what you really need for that sort of arrangement. But that can't happen, so this is ended up going to be 18'4" here, because you need that 4 foot buffer back there. So for this film, I'm pretty much ignoring parking 5 because I don't know what's happening there. The second thing I looked at, though, were these slots here, and it looked to me like this is a big long rig here, a 73 foot interstate rig, which is quite a bit longer than that one. And these slots weren't expanded up this way, presumably to allow for these trucks to back into this dock here. I don't know if that truck is shorter, if you don't get these interstate trucks in there, and the trucks are more the size like this, maybe 60 feet long, then you could possibly expand this parking 3 lot this way by 3 or 4 slots, 2 or 3 slots, although you might have to lose this one here. So I'm not sure that pays off either, but I did want to look at it. After taking a brief look at those issues there, I returned to concentrate on the ideas you had told me about, which basically are 3: parking here on this side of this building, number 4, or parking in front of it, same building, and finally down at building 1, maybe something could happen down there. So those are these 3 areas, what I'm going to call A, B, and C. And additionally, we wanted a 20 by 20 area for a pavilion type thing. And when I looked at A, one of the things is we need to have a retaining wall, and that is going to be probably at least 5 feet off of the building itself. And I don't know how long or how high this retaining wall, whether that can run down to here, and this one similarly, but retaining wall would be required. And this was roughly what you had roughed out. This 123'5" is what I took as a dimension when I was out there. And this was based on dimensions I took when I was out there. I believe I took I measured down here 43 foot 3 inches. So this striping is probably at 19 or 20 feet long in actuality, but I'm showing it 18 because that's the minimum requirement for Westchester Township, and as I said, I'd be using those for this review. But you can see even with an 18-foot slot in its existing space, that really only leaves 21'9" for back-out space, which you've been working with fine apparently, although that is substantially under the 23 or 22 foot 3 or 4 inches that they would recommend. Particularly, it's short of the 24 foot that would be required if this were going to be an inspected and approved project. So as I said, I'll be working with these 24 foot aisle clearance in 9 by 18 slots as minimum go-in precepts. And this was the first arrangement I came up with, which brought us from 29 slots in lot P to 47, adding 18 for all this, and I know that that is worth it. But this is how that divides up, with the retaining wall 5 feet from the building on this side. And in terms of down here, there is some sort of sewer here, a manhole cover here. So I'm not sure if that would complicate building out B here. But with this first arrangement here, I'm maintaining these 24 foot wide pathways, and I just maintained full depth parking slots of 20 feet as well, because there was the room to do it that way. So then just horsing around trying to squeeze a few more slots in, I made this a difficult thing where you come in here, in and out here, or in and out here, depending, but you don't have that aisle at the end like that, and that added an additional 4 slots, bring it 29 up from 29 to 51. And then I rearranged the 24 foot access road a different way, like this, where it wraps up in a U this way, and we ended up with 48 slots, which is still only adding 19. But these are standard 9 foot by 20 foot deep parking slots. And then again, because this retaining wall was being built anyway, so I don't know what is exactly happening and how far it happens back there, but if you want to push that back an additional 18 or 20 feet, then you add an additional 10 slots by doing it this way. Next, with that wall still back there, I horsed around a little bit with these angled parking, and this was a 45 degree in with the normal 14 foot wide aisle access, and I didn't really think this improved things. We ended up with 50 parking slots, and this way you can only come in this way. Here you can come in or out So I didn't particularly care for that at all as an alternative or as an arrangement. We had a little bit of space, a little bit more space up here. That retaining wall could be built closer to 7 or 8 feet off of the wall, off of building 4. But I threw that one away, and the next thing I did was began to play with some of these aisle widths, where I went down from these 24-foot access roads to something closer than what you have apparently been working with really throughout this, all 5 of these parking lots. And I took those aisle widths, I took the slots down to 18 foot deep, I left them at 9 foot wide, but I took the aisle widths down to what we had to work with, leaving this 5 foot off the building and coming as far as this existing paving here. Then you ended up with 21 foot 5 in and out. And recall that 22 foot 3 or 4 was more ideal. This gets you up to 65 slots in parking lot 2, and that's without moving that back the extra 18 or 20 feet. And if that new retaining wall can be built back there, then you can come from 29 slots all the way up to 71 if you can live with this 21 foot 5 aisle width here. And possibly you could increase these to the required 24 if all of these were reduced to. So if you made this whole row the 9 foot wide, we'll just call it 9 foot wide by the 14 foot deep compact car arrangement, then you would end up with 23 foot 5 in these aisles, and you would still have 71 spaces, although 13 of them would be for smaller cars. And I have just shown the pavilion down in here. This is dead space up in here, and this is still that basketball area down here. But without pushing that retaining wall back, you lose an additional 6 spaces, apparently, according to this diagram. And remember, if we reduce the width of these to 8 foot 5 instead of 9 foot, you probably end up with an extra 3 or 4 slots as a result of that. And here's the larger overview with those modifications shown there. And then the other alternative was alternative B was working with this here, and I really just made the one because I didn't see a lot of advantage that could be done with this. This got us from 29 up to 41 spaces, which is only an increase of 12 spaces for the work of this retaining wall here, and whatever that sewer lid is or that manhole cover is here. So that was all I did with B. And finally, with regard to C, down here, I just simply approached this from parallel parking in this way, and was able to end up with probably 9 slots to the end of the building. And if you could go you could probably go another 9 foot and still have this required 6 foot setback, because you can see how low this one is, how close this one is to the road here. So you could possibly pick up 2 more down through here. So just a couple other things with regard to clearances. This neighboring lot up here, this is laid out according to the rules apparently, where the slots are 18 wide and the aisles are 24 foot wide. When I looked at this here, according to how I laid this out, I didn't measure this lot here. This looks like, well, if those slots are 20 foot deep, that only leaves 15 for an aisle, a circulation aisle. And if they're 18 foot deep, then it would still only get us up to under 20 feet for this circulation aisle. So I don't know, maybe I just have that drawn wrong, and maybe that line is back here. But even when it's pushed all the way back here, and it just looks wrong, because this looks like the edge of the building here, even when it's pushed all the way back there, then you could end up with 18 foot slots and a 24 foot aisle. So I don't know what that is, how wide that is there, or what you've been living with there. So that was the existing, when I began to look at this, and this was the best case scenario when, spaces are added here, and we're counting some back here, 14 or 15 back here, and adding the 9 down here. Then we end up with 186 total which is probably up maybe 40 slots. So I think that's all I can tell you right now. Hopefully this provides some discussion or some starting points for you in any event. I would be curious to know what the actual dimension is on here, because whatever that is, once you take off the 36, I'd be curious what kind of an aisle you're working with now here, and I would also be curious what kind of pull-out space you're working with here, and whether this is actually used that much, what we can count back there, so that you can better assess which alternative is best. But I think for the work, I would be tending toward this A5, adding 65, or even the one that pushes back to the end of that basketball court and adds, something, ends up getting this up to 71 spaces. And this is a fairly central, at least to building 4 and 2, 3, and 1 parking lot. But I think that's it. Feel free to get in touch anytime. Thanks. Actually, lest I be remiss, I returned to this for a few minutes, because the downside to these A4 and A5, which gave us 65 and 71 spaces, was really just that there was only this 21-foot access road. All the spaces were the 18 by 9 requirement, and that 21 foot was the only downside, 21 foot 6. So there seemed to be enough room down here, and you can build to within 4 feet of the property line. So in A6, I pushed that out west another 5 feet or so to give us this 24-foot access road all the way around and maintain that same number of parking spaces. And you can see it's really not that much further than where the existing pavement is now. There's the existing pavement under there. So that is only an additional 5'2" beyond that pavement. And that's back here. So, but it's 5'2" down here at this corner, so it's going to be it's still just 5'2" here, but you can see that that grass has grown into that. But I don't know what that land is like down there either, so this could be a moot point, but I did want to cover it with A7. And notice this now, to get these spaces up here, to get to that 74, that retaining wall is 8'6" behind the existing building to provide these 18-foot deep slots for 24-foot wide driveway here. And then finally, it's still 74 spaces, but I put 2 handicap spaces down here sharing this 5-foot access aisle, and then this is about a 5-foot piece of sidewalk leading up to this pavilion and maintaining that same number of parking spaces at 74. This is like a green space up here because you can't really do anything with it. So you could have a picnic table or something up there, and the sidewalk to the pavilion. Is still, we have that basketball court, you have that basketball thing back there now. That's kind of a model of a typical basketball court there, requiring a little more depth maybe than what you're showing. But there's enough for the rim to still be there, but maybe there's a slot or two lost in that, if that's any kind of a priority. And here then is the actual final tally according to the best of what I could ascertain from what you had down there, which with the existing spaces here in the first column and the new modification spaces here, and this being the changes over here. And it amounted to, if a person made all of these changes, and I'm not sure about the ones at lot 3, which adds 4 here and deducts 1 there, with regard to this trucking, I don't know if that makes sense. I guess if you really needed parking at this area here, you could have it wrapped around here, 3 or 4 or 5 slots down through here, eating up some of that land. But otherwise, the other additions are the main one is adding 45 spaces here, and these 11 down here. And I guess one of these could also be a handicapped if there's a decent access back here. If there's handicap type access back here, then this could be a handicap space, this first one here. But that's it now. I think that's it, at least. So yeah, if you can afford another 5 feet into that western margin, you can get an actual real parking lot back there. That's all for now, for sure. Thanks.